The chandeliers of Thornfield Park's grand ballroom cast golden light across swirling silks and gleaming jewels, but Beatrice Hartley stood at the periphery, where shadows gathered like unwelcome companions. 26 years old, dressed in a modest gown of pale blue muslin that had seen 3 seasons, she maintained the practiced posture of a woman who had learned to occupy as little space as possible. The orchestra struck up a country dance, and couples arranged themselves with laughing enthusiasm. Beatrice's fingers tightened around her fan as she watched gentlemen seek partners with eager determination, each one's gaze sliding past her as if she were merely another column supporting the elegant architecture. "Poor dear Beatrice," came a voice pitched just loud enough to carry. Mrs. Lavinia Pemberton, Beatrice's cousin and employer, stood among a cluster of matrons, her rouge-brightened lips curved in sympathy as false as paste jewels. Always so useful at these gatherings. Such a pity that usefulness does not attract husbands. Though I suppose at her age, one must accept certain realities. The ladies tittered behind their fans. Beatrice felt the familiar burn in her throat, the tightness that preceded tears she had learned never to shed in company. She had endured 6 years of such casual cruelties since her father's death had transformed her from Miss Hartley of modest but respectable means into Miss Hartley, the impoverished relation dependent upon Lavinia's questionable charity. A gentleman approached. For one absurd moment, hope fluttered in her chest, but he merely needed to reach the refreshment table behind her. "Pardon me, miss," he murmured, not quite meeting her eyes. She stepped aside with mechanical grace, always stepping aside, always parting to let others pass. Sometimes Beatrice wondered if she had become so accomplished at disappearing that she had ceased to exist at all. The ballroom felt suddenly suffocating, the air thick with perfume and judgment. Lavinia was holding court now, her sharp laugh cutting through the music, and Beatrice knew that laugh. It meant more comments were coming, more delicate observations about spinsters and charity cases, and women who had failed at the only task society deemed worthy. Her feet carried her toward the terrace doors before conscious thought could intervene. Cool September air struck her flushed cheeks as she slipped outside, the sounds of the ball muffling behind heavy glass. The gardens of Thornfield Park stretched before her in silvered moonlight, and she walked quickly down the gravel path, her kid slippers crunching softly. She had no destination, only the desperate need to escape. Past the rose arbors and ornamental fountains she went, until she found herself before something she had only heard described in admiring whispers: the famous Thornfield Maze. Tall hedges of ancient yew rose like dark walls, the entrance a shadowed mouth that seemed to promise sanctuary. Beatrice glanced back once at the illuminated windows of the manor house, then stepped into the labyrinth's embrace. The world transformed. Suddenly there was only moonlight filtered through leaves, the whisper of wind through branches, and the peculiar silence that comes from being thoroughly enclosed. Her breathing slowed as she navigated turns, following instinct rather than knowledge, not caring if she became lost. Lost seemed preferable to found. The center of the maze opened unexpectedly. A small circular space with a weathered stone bench and a fountain whose gentle splash created a sound like quiet conversation. Beatrice sank onto the bench, and finally, in this hidden place where no one could witness her weakness, she allowed the tears to come. They fell silently, as she had trained them to, tracking down her cheeks while her shoulders remained still. She wept for the girl she had been, who had believed that kindness and intelligence might compensate for a modest dowry. She wept for the woman she had become, whose greatest accomplishment was being overlooked. A sound, barely perceptible, but enough to freeze her breath. Beatrice's head snapped up. There, emerging from the shadows near the opposite entrance, was a figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who had not expected company and found the discovery deeply unsettling. I did not expect company." The voice was deep, cultured, and edged with something that might have been alarm. Beatrice rose hastily, swiping at her tears with trembling fingers. Even in the darkness, she recognized the quality of his evening clothes, the unconscious authority in his bearing. "Forgive me. I did not mean to intrude. You are a guest of the house party." Not a question. He remained partially in shadow, and Beatrice realized with a start that this was deliberate. The moonlight fell on his right side, strong jaw, dark hair, while his left remained carefully obscured. "You should be at the ball." "As should you, I imagine." The words escaped before she could recall them. Beatrice pressed her hand to her mouth, horrified by her own boldness. But he did not seem offended. Indeed, she thought she detected something that might have been amusement in his stillness. "Perhaps we both came here for the same reason." The fountain splashed softly between them. Beatrice found herself studying what she could see of him, the elegant lines of his form, the way he held himself with unconscious dignity despite his obvious desire to remain hidden. There was something achingly familiar about his isolation, as if she were looking at a mirror that reflected not appearance, but essence. "To escape," she said quietly. "To breathe." He paused. "They are often the same thing." She should leave. Propriety demanded it. A lady did not converse unchaperoned with a gentleman, particularly not in a dark garden, particularly not when that lady's reputation was already whispered about in ballrooms. But Beatrice found she could not make her feet move. "I find the maze more honest than the ballroom," she said instead. "Here, at least, one expects to wander lost. There, one is simply meant to pretend otherwise." He stepped forward slightly, still maintaining his partial concealment, but close enough now that she could see his eyes. Dark, intense, and carrying a weight of understanding that made her breath catch. "You are unexpectedly perceptive, Miss Hartley. Beatrice Hartley." "Miss Hartley." He spoke her name as if testing its shape. "I am the Duke of Ashford." She had not meant to interrupt, but recognition had struck her suddenly. She knew of him, of course. Everyone did. The reclusive Duke who had not been seen in society for 5 years, who lived like a ghost in his own estate while his sister managed his social obligations. The whispers were varied and inventive. Madness, disfigurement, disgrace. "Your Grace." She curtsied, awkward in the confined space, but he made a sharp gesture that might have been dismissal of the formality. "You know of me, then." "Only that you value your privacy. I shall not disturb it further." Beatrice moved toward the path she had entered by, but his voice stopped her. "Miss Hartley." She turned. He remained in his shadows, but his posture had shifted, something in it less guarded, more uncertain. "Do you find the maze kinder than the ballroom tonight?" Her throat tightened with fresh tears, but she blinked them back. "Infinitely." "Then perhaps—" He hesitated, and she sensed that whatever he was about to say cost him something. "Perhaps we might both find refuge here, without questions, without judgment." Beatrice looked at this hidden duke, this man who arranged himself in shadows, and felt something shift in her chest. Here was someone who understood what it meant to stand at the edges of the world, watching others exist in sunlight. "Without expectations," she added softly. "Yes." The word carried relief. Precisely that. They stood in the moonlit center of the maze, two people who had fled the same bright, cruel world for the same dark, honest reason. Beatrice felt seen in a way she had not been in years, perhaps ever. Not because he could see her clearly, but because he did not need to. "I should return," she said, though she made no move to leave. "Before I am missed." "Are you often missed, Miss Hartley?" The question was too perceptive, too knowing. She smiled despite herself, a small, sad curve of lips. "No, Your Grace. Almost never." Then perhaps a few more moments would not be amiss. So she stayed, and they spoke of inconsequential things: the unseasonable warmth of the evening, the architecture of mazes, the particular quality of moonlight through yew branches. And in speaking of nothing, they said everything that mattered. When Beatrice finally left, navigating the dark paths back toward the house with surprising ease, the Duke of Ashford remained in the center of his labyrinth. He stood in the moonlight now, no longer hiding, his scarred face fully revealed to the empty night. His fingers rose unconsciously to touch the twisted skin that covered the left side of his face, the legacy of flames and foolish heroism. But for the first time in 5 years, he did not feel monstrous. He felt, instead, unexpectedly curious about a woman with sad eyes and a spine of steel, who had looked at his shadows and chosen to stay anyway. Beatrice told herself she would not return to the maze. Propriety forbade it. Common sense warned against it. Yet the following evening, as the house party guests gathered for an evening of cards and gossip, she found her feet carrying her once more through the darkened gardens. He was there. Alexander Blackwood, Duke of Ashford, stood beside the fountain as if he had been waiting. In the moonlight, she could now see clearly what he had hidden the previous night: the scarred tissue that marked the left side of his face, pulling at his eye and mouth, transforming what would have been classical handsomeness into something more complex. Something that spoke of pain endured and survival claimed. "Your Grace?" She curtsied, but he shook his head. "If we are to meet in secret gardens, perhaps we might dispense with formality. Alexander, if you please." "Then you must call me Beatrice." She moved to the bench, and after a moment's hesitation, he joined her. Not close enough to be improper, but near enough that she could see the way moonlight silvered his dark hair. "You are not at the card tables tonight, Beatrice." She laughed softly, the sound carrying bitter amusement. "I am rarely included in such entertainments. My cousin believes I am more useful arranging her shawls and fetching her cordials." "Your cousin is a fool." The blunt declaration startled her. She turned to find him watching her with those intense dark eyes, and something warm unfurled in her chest. "She provides me with room and board. In my position, one cannot afford to be particular about the terms." "What is your position?" He asked it gently, but with genuine interest, as if her answer mattered. Beatrice found herself explaining her father's death, the discovery of his debts, her brother Thomas's barely adequate living as a country vicar, her own reluctant acceptance of Lavinia's offer of employment disguised as charity. She had never spoken so openly about these circumstances, but something about the darkness and his quiet attention loosened the words. "So you see," she concluded, "I exist in a peculiar space, too genteel to be truly a servant, too impoverished to be truly a guest. I am perpetually invisible." "Sometimes invisibility is a choice," Alexander said slowly. "Sometimes it is imposed." He touched his scarred face unconsciously. "I wonder which is worse." "You chose yours?" "After a fashion." His jaw tightened. 5 years ago, there was a fire. My sister, she was trapped. I went in after her. He gestured to his face. "This was the price. Margaret lived, but I could not bear the stares, the pity, the revulsion poorly hidden behind polite expressions. So I withdrew." Beatrice turned to face him fully. The moonlight illuminated his scars in silver relief, the puckered skin, the damaged tissue. She looked at him steadily, without flinching, without the exaggerated sympathy he clearly despised. "You have kind eyes," she said quietly. "That is what I notice most." He went absolutely still. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Alexander exhaled shakily. You are remarkable. I am ordinary. No. The word was fierce. You are anything but. The fountain whispered between them, and Beatrice felt something shift, some wall crumbling, some possibility opening. They talked until the moon had moved appreciably across the sky, and when Beatrice finally rose to leave, Alexander stood as well. Tomorrow night? He asked, and there was vulnerability in the question that made her heart ache. Tomorrow night? She confirmed. The following 3 evenings followed a pattern that became precious ritual. While the house party guests played their elaborate social games, Beatrice and Alexander met in the maze's heart. They spoke of everything: books and philosophy, childhood memories and present loneliness, small joys and great sorrows. He brought her a cashmere shawl on the second night, having noticed her shiver. She brought him a volume of Wordsworth on the third, recalling his mention of loving poetry. These small gestures carried weight beyond their material value, each one a recognition, an acknowledgement of attention paid and care taken. By the 4th evening, Beatrice found herself watching for him throughout the day. She glimpsed him once from a window, walking the grounds in early morning when he thought himself unobserved, his scarred face catching the first light of dawn. She wanted to call out, to wave, but something in his solitary figure stopped her. These were his hours of freedom, just as the maze was their shared sanctuary. The 4th night arrived heavy with the scent of approaching rain. Beatrice hurried to the maze, troubled by the darkening sky but unwilling to miss their meeting. Alexander was already there, pacing with barely suppressed energy. I thought the weather might keep you away, he said, relief evident in his voice. It would take more than rain to keep me from... She stopped, suddenly aware of what she had been about to reveal. From you. But he heard it anyway. She saw it in his eyes, in the way his expression softened. He took a step closer, and suddenly the space between them felt charged with more than impending storm. Beatrice, Thunder cracked overhead, and the sky opened. Rain fell in sudden sheets, drenching them both in seconds. Beatrice gasped at the cold shock of it, and Alexander grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the only shelter available, a small pergola covered in climbing roses at the edge of the circular space. They pressed together under the inadequate roof, rain hammering down around them. The structure was small, meant for one person to sit beneath, and standing required them to be closer than propriety would ever normally allow. Beatrice was intensely aware of Alexander's warmth, his height, the way his breath stirred the damp hair at her temple. Your gown is ruined, he said roughly. It is hardly my finest. She tried to laugh, but the sound caught in her throat because he was looking at her with such intensity, such unveiled longing, that she forgot how to breathe. A leaf had caught in his hair, trapped against the scarred side of his face where it met his temple. Without thinking, Beatrice reached up to remove it. Her fingers brushed the twisted skin, and she felt him tense beneath her touch. But she did not pull away. Instead, her hand lingered, gently tracing the line of scarring that ran from temple to jaw. His skin was warm beneath her fingertips, the texture different but not repulsive, simply part of him, a map of his courage and sacrifice. Beatrice. Her name was a prayer and a warning. Yes? I should not. We cannot. His control was fracturing. She could see it in his eyes, in the way his hands had come to rest on her waist. You deserve more than a scarred recluse who hides in gardens. More than what? The words burst from her, frustration and longing warring in her voice. More than a man who sees me, who speaks to me as if I matter, who makes me feel as though I exist. You deserve everything, he said fiercely. You deserve a man who can stand beside you in ballrooms without causing scandal, who can give you the life you should have had. I deserve to choose my own life. She was shaking now, though not from cold. to choose my own happiness. And what would make you happy? He asked it as if afraid of the answer. This, she whispered. You. The words hung between them for a heartbeat. Then Alexander made a sound somewhere between a groan and a surrender, and his mouth found hers. The kiss was everything, desperate and tender, fierce and reverent. His hands cradled her face as if she were infinitely precious, and Beatrice gripped his coat as if he were the only solid thing in a world gone fluid. Rain drummed around them, but they were lost to it, lost to everything except this moment of perfect recognition. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. I cannot offer you what you deserve, he said hoarsely. I am not whole. Neither am I. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. But perhaps together we might be. He kissed her again, softer this time, a kiss that tasted of hope and possibility. When the rain began to ease, they stood wrapped in each other, speaking in whispers about impossible futures and reckless dreams. Beatrice returned to the house in her ruined gown, her hair tangled and her heart singing. She slipped through the servants' entrance and hurried toward her small room, thinking herself unobserved. But Lavinia Pemberton watched from a darkened doorway, her expression calculating and cold. The next 2 days passed in agony. Alexander did not come to the maze. Beatrice waited the first night until well past midnight, then returned shivering and alone. The second night she went earlier, stayed later, but the center of the labyrinth remained empty save for her growing despair. Had she been too forward? Had her kiss driven him away? The questions tormented her as she performed her duties, arranging Lavinia's shawls with mechanical precision while her heart ached. She glimpsed Alexander once from across the grounds, walking rapidly in the opposite direction, his shoulders rigid with tension. When their eyes met for one brief moment, she saw conflict and pain in his expression before he looked away. Lady Margaret Ashford found Beatrice in the library on the third afternoon. The Duke's sister was a handsome woman of 28, with her brother's dark eyes and a penetrating intelligence that made Beatrice nervous. Miss Hartley, might I have a word? They sat by the window, and Margaret studied her with unsettling directness. My brother has been different these past weeks. Lighter, somehow. Less haunted. She paused. Until 3 days ago. Beatrice's hands twisted in her lap. I'm sure I wouldn't know. Please do not insult either of us with polite lies. Margaret's tone was not unkind. Whatever has occurred between you and Alexander, it matters. He matters. And I think, Miss Hartley, that you matter to him more than you realize. Then why does he avoid me? The words escaped before Beatrice could stop them. Margaret sighed. Because he is a fool who believes that his scars make him unworthy of happiness. Because he thinks he is protecting you by staying away. She leaned forward. But I know my brother. Whatever he tells himself, he will not be able to maintain this distance. The question is, Miss Hartley, when he breaks, will you be there? Always, Beatrice whispered. That evening, Lavinia struck. She found Beatrice in the corridor outside their rooms, her expression a mask of false concern. My dear cousin, we must speak. She drew Beatrice into her chamber, closing the door with ominous finality. I have been informed of your nocturnal wanderings, your assignations with the Duke in the gardens. Ice flooded Beatrice's veins. I do not know what you... Do not compound impropriety with lies. Lavinia's voice turned sharp. Did you think no one would notice? That your pathetic attempts to ensnare a duke would go unobserved? I have not attempted to ensnare anyone. No? Lavinia circled her like a predator. You have been meeting him in secret, alone, unchaperoned. Do you know what that makes you? It makes me a woman who found kindness where you see only titles and opportunity. The slap came without warning, snapping Beatrice's head to the side. She touched her stinging cheek, shocked not by the pain but by her own sudden, blazing anger. "You will cease these meetings immediately," Lavinia hissed. "You will stay away from the Duke, and if you do not, I will ensure that every drawing room in England knows exactly what kind of desperate creature you are. Your reputation, your brother's position, I will destroy it all." "Why?" Beatrice asked quietly. "Why do you hate me so much?" "Because you forget your place." Lavinia's composure cracked. "You are nothing, a charity case who should be grateful for scraps. Yet you dare to reach for a duke? To imagine yourself worthy of such a match?" She stepped closer, her voice dropping to venom. "He would never truly want you. He pities you, you fool. Just as I do." Beatrice met her cousin's eyes steadily. For 6 years she had endured such cruelty in silence. But something had changed in the maze, in Alexander's arms. She had remembered what it felt like to matter. "You are wrong," she said clearly. "About him, about me, about everything. I will not compete for any man's attentions, Mrs. Pemberton. Nor will I apologize for finding genuine conversation where you see only titles and transactions." She walked to the door, hand steady on the knob. "You have given me room and board, and I am grateful. But gratitude does not require me to accept contempt. I will stay through the week's end, as contracted. After that, you will need to find someone else to arrange your shawls." She left Lavinia sputtering behind her, and though her knees shook and her cheek throbbed, Beatrice felt something that might have been pride. That night, she went to the maze one final time. She would honor her words to Lavinia. She would not chase Alexander, would not make him feel obligated. But she needed to see the place where she had learned to hope again, to say goodbye to the brief, beautiful dream. He was there. Alexander stood by the fountain, still dressed formally as if he had just left some gathering. When he saw her, his expression transformed. Relief, longing, and something that might have been desperation. "Beatrice." He crossed to her in 3 long strides. "I thought I could stay away. That it would be better for you if I—" "You thought wrong." She cut him off, reaching for his hands. "Did you truly believe I would be better served by your absence? By going back to my half-life of invisibility? You deserve more than I can give. Stop telling me what I deserve." Her voice broke. "Stop deciding for me. I am tired of people determining my worth, my future, my feelings. You asked me what would make me happy. I told you. Has that changed?" "No." The word was anguished. "God help me, no. Every moment away from you has been torment." "Then why?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Why did you leave me here alone?" "Because I'm afraid." The confession came raw and broken. "Afraid that you will wake one morning and see what everyone else sees. A reclusive, scarred man who has nothing to offer but isolation and shame." "I see a man who saved his sister's life." Beatrice's hands came up to frame his face, scarred side and whole. "I see someone who understands what it means to hurt, who listens when I speak, who makes me feel seen." Her voice softened. "I see you, Alexander, all of you, and I am not afraid." He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. When he opened them again, they shone with unshed tears. "You are the least pitiable woman I have ever known," he said roughly. "You are extraordinary. You are everything." When he kissed her this time, it tasted of salt and surrender, of walls finally crumbling and fears finally faced. They held each other in the moonlit center of the maze, 2 people who had been lost finding their way home. "I love you," Alexander whispered against her hair. "I should not, but I do. Desperately." "I love you," Beatrice answered, inconveniently and completely. They stood together until the moon began to set, making plans and promises, building a future from hope and determination. When they finally parted, it was with the understanding that they would face whatever came next together. Neither of them saw Lavinia Pemberton slip away into the darkness, her expression venomous with thwarted rage. The morning of the final ball dawned bright and merciless. Beatrice woke to find a note slipped under her door, written in Lavinia's precise hand. "Your indiscretions have been noted. Prepare for consequences." At breakfast, the atmosphere in the morning room was glacial. Conversations stopped when Beatrice entered, then resumed in pointed whispers. Lady Margaret looked concerned, several younger ladies giggled behind their hands, and Lavinia held court at the center of it all, her expression a masterpiece of false sympathy. "Poor Miss Hartley," she was saying as Beatrice took her seat. "One can hardly blame her, I suppose. A woman in her situation, so desperate for security, might make regrettable choices. Still, to throw herself at the Duke in such a manner—" Beatrice's hand trembled as she reached for the teapot, but she maintained her composure. She had endured worse. She could endure this. "I have heard," continued Mrs. Fairfax, one of Lavinia's cronies, "that she has been meeting him in secret, in the gardens, alone." "Scandalous," another woman murmured. "Though I suppose when one has no prospects, one must resort to desperate measures." Lady Margaret set down her cup with enough force to make it ring. "I find this speculation both tedious and inappropriate. Perhaps we might discuss something of actual interest?" But the damage was done. Beatrice felt the weight of judgment pressing down on her, the familiar sensation of being evaluated and found wanting. Only now it was worse, because now she had something to lose. Someone to lose. She excused herself as soon as she could manage, but not before hearing Lavinia's final barb. "I do hope the Duke will do the honorable thing. Though one cannot blame him if he chooses to avoid such entanglement. After all, what gentleman of quality would truly want damaged goods?" Beatrice made it to her room before the tears came. She had known this would happen, had warned Alexander about the consequences. But knowing and experiencing were vastly different things. A knock at her door made her straighten hastily. She opened it to find Lady Margaret, her expression grim. "My brother should know what is being said." "No." Beatrice shook her head firmly. "He will feel obligated. He will make a gesture out of honor rather than genuine desire. You underestimate him." Margaret stepped inside, closing the door. "And yourself. Alexander loves you, Miss Hartley. I have not seen my brother truly alive in 5 years, but with you, he breathes again. Love is not enough against social ruin." "Then it is fortunate," Margaret said with a slight smile, "that my brother has never cared overmuch for society's opinion. It is time he remembered that." She left, and Beatrice sank onto her narrow bed, caught between hope and dread. In his study, Alexander Blackwood listened to his sister's report with growing fury. Not at Beatrice, never at Beatrice, but at the society that could be so casually, viciously cruel. "They are calling her desperate," Margaret said quietly. "They are saying she entrapped you." "I will not have her name slandered." Alexander's voice was steel. "I will not allow her to suffer for my cowardice." "Then what will you do?" Alexander looked at his scarred reflection in the window glass. For 5 years he had hidden from the world, convincing himself it was self-protection. But in truth, it had been fear. Fear of rejection, of pity, of confirming his worst beliefs about his own monstrosity. Beatrice had seen through all of it. She had looked at his scars and seen him. Now society threatened to destroy her for that very compassion. "I have hidden long enough," he said. "If they will judge her, let them judge us together." Margaret's smile was fierce. Finally, the brother I remember. The evening transformed Thornfield Park into a glittering fantasy. Every chandelier blazed, every surface gleamed, and the guests arrayed themselves in their finest silks and jewels. It was the culminating event of the house party, and attendance was mandatory. Beatrice dressed in her best gown, pale green silk that had been her mother's, carefully altered and maintained. She arranged her hair with shaking hands, trying to summon courage she did not feel. Lavinia had made clear that tonight would be Beatrice's final humiliation, her complete social destruction. She descended the stairs alone, as always. The ballroom doors stood open, spilling light and music and laughter. Beatrice paused at the threshold, gathering her tattered dignity like armor. Inside, she immediately felt the weight of stares. Conversations paused. Fans fluttered with renewed energy. Lavinia stood near the center of the room, surrounded by her coterie, watching Beatrice's entrance with undisguised satisfaction. The evening proceeded like a nightmare rendered in formal dress. No gentleman approached her. The few ladies who had previously shown her courtesy now looked away. Even the servants seemed to avoid her, as if failure were contagious. Beatrice maintained her composure through sheer will. She stood near a column, watching couples dance, pretending she did not care about the whispers. But inside, her heart was breaking. This was it, then. The final confirmation that she did not belong, would never belong. She had been foolish to hope, to dream. Foolish to believe that love might be enough. The music swelled, and Beatrice closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, she would leave. She would walk out of this ballroom with her head high, and she would never look back. The music stopped. Not gradually, but abruptly, the orchestra falling silent mid-phrase. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. Beatrice opened her eyes to see people turning, looking toward the main entrance. The great doors swung open. Alexander Blackwood, Duke of Ashford, stood framed in the doorway. The gasp that swept the room was audible. Many of these guests had never seen him. He had been absent from society for 5 years. Those who had known him before stared openly at his scarred face, now fully visible in the blazing light. He was dressed immaculately in black evening clothes, his dark hair swept back, his bearing radiating ducal authority. But it was his expression that held Beatrice frozen. Fierce determination, an unmistakable purpose. Alexander's eyes swept the ballroom and found her. Something in his face softened, and he began to walk. The crowd parted before him like water before a ship's prow. Shocked silence followed his progress as he crossed the ballroom floor, never looking away from Beatrice. His stride was steady, unhurried, allowing everyone to see him clearly. The scars, the Duke, the man who had chosen to emerge from shadow. He stopped directly before her. Beatrice's heart hammered so violently she thought it might escape her chest. Up close, she could see the tension in his jaw, the slight tremble in his hands. He was terrified, she realized. Terrified, but here anyway. "Miss Hartley." His voice carried in the absolute silence. "Beatrice." She could not speak, could not breathe. Alexander took her hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture so tender that several ladies gasped. Then he spoke, his voice pitched to carry to every corner of the ballroom. "You are the most remarkable woman I have ever known. You see what others overlook. You find beauty where others see only darkness. You have shown me that hiding is not the same as healing, that scars are evidence of survival rather than failure." His voice roughened with emotion. "You make me want to be brave." Tears spilled down Beatrice's cheeks unchecked. "I cannot offer you a life free from judgment," Alexander continued. "I cannot erase your past struggles or promise easy futures. But I can promise you this, you will never be invisible again. You will never be undervalued or dismissed. You will be cherished, protected, and loved with every breath I take." He dropped to one knee, and the room erupted in shocked whispers. "Beatrice Hartley, would you do me the extraordinary honor of accepting my hand in marriage? Of becoming my duchess, my partner, my home?" The ballroom had fallen into chaos around them. Exclamations, gasps, frantic whispering. But Beatrice saw only Alexander, this brave, beautiful man who had emerged from hiding for her, who knelt before society and offered her everything. "Yes." The word came out choked with tears. "Yes, Alexander, always yes." He surged to his feet, lifting her in his arms and kissing her soundly in front of the entire assembly. The breach of propriety was scandalous, shocking, and absolutely perfect. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the ballroom had erupted into genuine chaos. Some guests applauded, others looked scandalized, but Alexander paid them no mind. He kept Beatrice's hand firmly in his, turning to face the crowd with ducal authority. "I trust," he said clearly, "that there will be no further speculation about Miss Hartley's character. She is to be my duchess, and anyone who questions her worthiness questions mine." His gaze found Lavinia Pemberton, standing frozen with an expression of utter disbelief. Lady Margaret appeared at her side, her smile sharp as cut glass. "How fortunate, Mrs. Pemberton," Margaret said sweetly, "that you brought your cousin to our attention. My brother is forever in your debt for introducing him to his future wife." Lavinia's face cycled through shock, rage, and finally, grudging defeat. She understood the game was lost. The Duke of Ashford had claimed Beatrice publicly, and no amount of gossip could overturn that declaration. Several ladies who had snubbed Beatrice earlier now rushed forward with congratulations, their previous coldness forgotten in their eagerness to curry favor with the future duchess. Beatrice accepted their well wishes with grace, though she remained pressed against Alexander's side, drawing strength from his solid presence. The orchestra, recovering from their shock, struck up a waltz. Alexander turned to Beatrice, his scarred face radiant with joy. "May I have this dance, my love?" "You may have every dance," she whispered, "for the rest of our lives." He led her onto the floor, and this time, when they moved through the ballroom, it was not in shadow, but in triumphant light. Other couples joined them gradually, but Beatrice was aware only of Alexander, the way he held her, the love shining in his dark eyes, the future they would build together. As they turned in the dance, she caught glimpses of the room around them. Lady Margaret beaming with satisfaction, Lavinia making a hasty exit, young ladies watching with envy and older matrons with calculation. The world had shifted on its axis, and Beatrice Hartley, invisible, dismissed, forgotten Beatrice, stood at its center. But none of that mattered nearly as much as the man who held her close. "Shall we scandalize them further?" Alexander murmured near her ear. "I find I have a taste for shocking society." Beatrice laughed, the sound free and joyous. "What did you have in mind? Leaving our own ball early, walking in moonlit gardens, perhaps visiting a certain maze." "Your Grace," she said with mock severity, "that would be highly improper." "Indeed." His smile was wicked. "Shall we?" "Absolutely." When the dance ended, they slipped away from the ballroom hand in hand, leaving the whispers and speculation behind. They walked through the cool September night, past the rose arbors and ornamental fountains, until they reached the entrance to the maze. The labyrinth welcomed them like an old friend. They navigated its paths together now, no longer lost or hiding, but simply choosing this private place over the bright, demanding world. In the center, beside the fountain where they had first truly seen each other, Alexander pulled Beatrice into his arms. "I love you," he said simply. "My brave, extraordinary Beatrice." I love you, she answered. My kind, courageous Alexander. They kissed beneath the stars, surrounded by ancient yew and the gentle splash of water. Two people who had been overlooked, dismissed, and diminished had found each other in the shadows and chosen to step into the light together. Behind them, Thornfield Park glowed with celebration. Ahead of them stretched a future filled with challenges and joys, struggles and triumphs. But in this moment, in the heart of the maze where their story had begun, there was only love, certain, steadfast, and strong enough to weather any storm. Alexander rested his forehead against Beatrice's, his hands cradling her face with infinite tenderness. No more hiding, he promised. No more invisibility, she agreed. And in finding each other, they had finally, beautifully, found themselves.